Imagine this. A billionaire was invited to his children's school for a parents-teachers meeting, but froze when he saw twins that looked exactly like his children, and standing beside them was his late wife, who died 8 years ago. What happened next was not what anybody had thought. But before we tell this story, we need to start from the very beginning. Chief Richard Adebola sat in his lavish corner office on the 50th floor of Adebola Towers, Lagos Island, staring out at the bustling metropolis below. At 65, he commanded respect from thousands of employees. And when he spoke at board meetings, grown men sat down quietly to listen. His business empire spanned across West Africa, making him one of the wealthiest men on the continent. Yet despite all his power and influence, he couldn't control his own twin daughters. His intercom buzzed. "Sir, the quarterly reports are ready for your review," his secretary announced. "Not now, Patricia, hold my calls." Richard rubbed his temples, thinking about Daisy and Diana. It had taken him and his wife Catherine 10 long years to conceive those girls, 10 years of medical consultations, prayers, and hope. When they finally arrived, he had sworn to give them everything money could buy. Perhaps that had been his greatest mistake. The twins were now 28 years old and still fought like cats and dogs over everything. Toothpaste, clothes, hairstyles, even which color was better for Monday morning. People often asked him, "Chief, how can twins fight so much? Are you sure they're really twins?" He would laugh it off, but privately wondered the same thing. Diana was the calm, sensible one. She had studied business administration at Lagos Business School, graduated with distinction, and insisted on starting as an intern in his company, despite his protests. "Daddy, I want to earn my place," she had said with that determined look in her eyes. "I don't want people saying I got my position because I'm your daughter." She worked her way up the corporate ladder, impressing colleagues and competitors alike with her sharp business acumen. Now she practically ran half the company, and Richard couldn't have been prouder. Daisy, on the other hand, was a hurricane in designer clothes. Loud, hot-tempered, and highly opinionated, she could argue about anything and everything. She had studied architecture at the University of Lagos, earned decent grades, then promptly announced she didn't want to be trapped in some boring office designing houses. Instead, she threw lavish parties at the Banana Island mansion. Richard had bought her, lived like every day was a celebration, and seemed to think the world owed her constant entertainment. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Catherine would plead during their frequent family arguments. "Why can't she be more like me?" Daisy would fire back. "Life is too short to waste behind a desk pretending to be important. At least I know how to have fun." This evening, as Richard sat in his study reviewing business proposals, his phone rang. It was his longtime friend and business partner, Chief Benjamin Thompson. "Richard, my son Oliver just returned from London with his MBA. Remember we discussed the possibility of him marrying one of your daughters?" Richard straightened up. "Ah, yes, how is the boy?" "Sharp as a razor, just like his old man. He's ready to settle down, and you know how much respect I have for your family. I was thinking Daisy would be perfect. She's the elder twin, and she has that vibrant personality." Richard chuckled despite his concerns. "Vibrant is one way to put it. Let me discuss it with the girls." That evening, the Adebola family gathered for dinner in their magnificent Victoria Island mansion. The dining room could accommodate 30 guests, but tonight it was just the 4 of them around the smaller family table. "Girls, I have something important to discuss," Richard began, cutting into his perfectly prepared pepper soup. "Let me guess," Daisy said without looking up from her phone. "Another boring business deal that Diana will handle while I'm expected to smile and look decorative at some launch party." "Daisy, put that phone away at dinner," Catherine scolded gently. "Your father is speaking." Daisy reluctantly set her iPhone aside, her freshly manicured nails drumming impatiently on the mahogany table. "Chief Thompson's son, Oliver, has returned from London," Richard continued carefully. "He's an impressive young man with excellent prospects and, well, Benjamin and I have been discussing the possibility of a marriage arrangement." The silence that followed was deafening. Diana looked thoughtful, but cautious. Daisy's eyes widened in horror. "Marriage? Daddy, are you serious?" Daisy exclaimed, her voice rising several octaves. "I'm not ready for marriage. I'm still enjoying my baby girl lifestyle. Marriage means responsibility and having to ask someone's permission before I do anything? Daisy, you're 28 years old, Catherine pointed out diplomatically. Most women your age are already married with children. And look how boring they've become. Daisy stood up dramatically, her chair scraping against the marble floor. Jennifer got married 2 years ago, and now all she talks about is baby formulas and diaper brands. Sarah married that banker, and she's gained 20 pounds from stress. No, thank you. Richard tried a different approach. Oliver is very successful, Daisy. He has his own investment firm, properties in London and Lagos. Daddy, I don't care if he owns half of England. Daisy's voice reached near shriek levels. I am not interested in being tied down to marriage. I want to travel, party, live my life. Why can't Diana marry him instead? All eyes turned to Diana, who had been quietly observing the drama. Well, Diana said thoughtfully, twirling her spoon in her soup, I'd be willing to meet him first. If he's as respectable as Chief Thompson says, and if we're compatible, then I don't see why not. Daisy's mouth fell open. Diana, you can't just agree to marry a complete stranger. I'm not agreeing to marry him, Diana replied calmly. I'm agreeing to meet him and see if there's potential. There's a significant difference. But I'm the elder twin, Daisy protested. Tradition says I should marry first. Tradition also says the elder should be more mature and responsible, Diana countered sweetly. 2 weeks later, Oliver Thompson arrived at the Adebola mansion for what Daisy dramatically called the audition dinner. He was tall, handsome, well-dressed, and spoke with the polished accent of someone who had spent considerable time in international business circles. Richard watched with growing satisfaction as Diana and Oliver engaged in intelligent conversation about global markets, investment strategies, and their shared appreciation for classical literature. Daisy, meanwhile, spent most of the evening scrolling through her phone and occasionally rolling her eyes at what she clearly considered their boring intellectual show-off session. So, Oliver, Daisy interrupted during a discussion about emerging markets. What do you do for fun? Or are you one of those people who think entertainment is reading the Financial Times? Oliver laughed good-naturedly. I enjoy many things, traveling to new countries, trying different cuisines, sailing, playing tennis. What about you, Daisy? I throw parties, she said with a mischievous grin. Epic, legendary parties, the kind that get written about in society magazines. Diana thinks I'm frivolous, but I believe life should be one continuous celebration. There's certainly nothing wrong with enjoying life, Oliver agreed diplomatically, though his attention kept drifting back to Diana's more substantive conversation. As the evening progressed, it became increasingly obvious that Oliver and Diana had found something special in each other. They shared similar values, complementary ambitions, and seemed genuinely interested in each other's thoughts and dreams. After Oliver left, Daisy cornered her sister in the family's luxurious living room. I cannot believe you're actually considering this arranged marriage nonsense. You just met him 3 hours ago. And I like everything I've discovered so far, Diana replied, settling into her favorite velvet armchair. He's intelligent, ambitious, respectful, well-traveled, boring as watching paint dry, stable and mature. Unlike certain people I know who change boyfriends like they change handbags. Daisy gasped dramatically. That is completely unfair. I don't change boyfriends that often. What about Marcus from last month? And before him, there was James, then Stephen, then that musician, whose name I can't even remember. Okay, I understand your point. Daisy waved her hands dismissively. But at least I'm experiencing life. You're going to marry someone just because Daddy and his friend decided you should. Where's the romance? The butterflies? The passionate love story? Diana smiled mysteriously. Who says there aren't butterflies? Over the following months, Diana and Oliver's relationship blossomed into something beautiful. They went on romantic dates to art galleries, fine restaurants, and quiet beaches where they could talk for hours about their dreams and aspirations. Richard and Catherine were delighted to see their usually reserved daughter laughing more and opening her heart to love. Daisy watched from the sidelines with growing resentment. Not because she wanted Oliver, she genuinely found him as exciting as a tax audit, but because she felt like Diana was getting all the family's attention and approval while she was being treated like the problematic child. It's completely unfair, she complained to her friend Sandra during one of their weekly spa sessions at the Oriental Hotel. Diana gets the perfect husband, daddy's respect in the company, and now she'll probably get an even bigger inheritance. But you rejected Oliver yourself, Sandra pointed out, adjusting her cucumber facial mask. And you've always said you don't want to work in the boring family business. That's not the point. Daisy's voice rose, causing other spa clients to glance over disapprovingly. It's about principle. Why does Diana get to have everything perfect while I get criticized for living my life the way I want? The engagement was announced 6 months later, and wedding preparations began immediately. Catherine threw herself into planning what she declared would be the most magnificent wedding Lagos has ever witnessed. The guest list included governors, senators, international business moguls, and Nollywood celebrities. Diana asked Daisy to be her maid of honor. I suppose I don't have much choice, Daisy said with false sweetness. But I'm choosing my own dress design. I refuse to look like some frilly Christmas decoration just because it's your special day. As the wedding date approached, Daisy's mood grew increasingly dark. She found fault with everything. The flowers were too traditional, the music selection was too conservative, the menu was too predictable. But what really bothered her was listening to people gush about the happy couple. They're absolutely perfect together, she overheard one of Catherine's society friends saying at the bridal shower. Diana is so fortunate to have found such a wonderful man, and he clearly adores her, another woman added. You can see it in his eyes whenever she speaks. The wedding day arrived with typical Lagos extravaganza. The cathedral was decorated with white orchids and gold accents, and guests arrived in their most spectacular traditional and Western outfits. Diana looked stunning in her custom-designed gown, and Oliver couldn't stop beaming as he waited at the altar. During the ceremony, as Diana and Oliver exchanged heartfelt vows they had written themselves, Daisy felt a strange, twisting sensation in her stomach. Not because she wanted Oliver. She truly didn't. But because she suddenly understood what she had lost. Not a man, but an opportunity to be first, to be chosen, to be celebrated. The reception was held at the family's estate, transformed into a fairyland with thousands of lights, exotic flowers, and enough gourmet food to satisfy half of Lagos. The couple's first dance was to Ed Sheeran's Perfect, and there wasn't a dry eye among the 800 guests. Richard gave a speech that moved everyone to tears. My daughter Diana has always been extraordinary. She works with dedication, treats everyone with kindness, and never gives up on her principles. Oliver, you're receiving a wife who will stand beside you through any challenge life brings. Take care of her heart. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the newlyweds had left for their honeymoon in the Maldives, Daisy sat alone in her bedroom, staring at her reflection. She took everything from me, she whispered to herself. First the company, now my man, but he was never your man, a rational voice in her head argued. You rejected him, remember? That's irrelevant, she said aloud, startling herself with the venom in her voice. I'm the elder twin. I should have married first. I should be getting all the congratulations and attention. The seed of resentment that had been growing in Daisy's heart suddenly bloomed into something much darker and more dangerous. She began formulating a plan. If Diana could have everything, then perhaps it was time for Diana to lose everything. The newlyweds returned from their honeymoon, glowing with happiness and deeper in love than ever. Diana threw herself back into work with renewed energy, while Oliver established his Lagos headquarters and began expanding his West African operations. They moved into a gorgeous house in Lekki Phase 1, and life seemed perfect. But Daisy was working behind the scenes like a spider spinning an invisible web. She began by befriending the domestic staff in Diana's new home, offering them generous tips for what she called little favors. Just keep me updated on my sister's schedule, she would tell the housekeeper Mary, pressing a thick envelope of Naira notes into her hand. I want to surprise her sometimes with visits, and I need to know when she'll be home. She employed the same strategy with junior staff at the company, positioning herself as the concerned sister who worried about Diana's workaholic tendencies. You know how dedicated she is to the business? Daisy would say with expertly feigned concern. Sometimes she forgets to take care of her health. If you notice she's staying late or taking on too much stress, Just inform me so I can intervene as her caring sister. What she was actually doing was building a comprehensive network of informants who reported Diana's every movement, meeting, and plan. 3 months after the wedding, Diana began experiencing morning nausea, unusual fatigue, and food aversions that made her suspect she might be pregnant. "I think we need to see the doctor," she told Oliver one evening as they shared a quiet dinner in their elegant dining room. "I believe we might be expecting our first child." Oliver's face illuminated with pure joy. "Really? Are you certain? I want to confirm it with proper medical tests, but all the symptoms are pointing in that direction." The next morning, Diana visited her gynecologist, Dr. Williams, at the prestigious St. Nicholas Hospital. After comprehensive examinations and tests, he confirmed her suspicions with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Thompson. You're approximately 6 weeks pregnant and everything looks perfectly healthy." Diana was overjoyed beyond words. She scheduled a follow-up appointment for the following week and asked Dr. Williams to email the detailed test results so she could share them with Oliver that evening. That same afternoon, she received an urgent phone call from one of their most important clients in Abuja. "Mrs. Thompson, we have a critical situation with the merger contract. You're the only one who fully understands the complexities involved. We need you here immediately to resolve some legal complications." Diana sighed deeply. She had hoped to go home early and celebrate the pregnancy news with Oliver over a romantic dinner, but business obligations couldn't be ignored. "How long will the meeting take?" she asked. "Just a few hours maximum. If you take the company helicopter, you can be back in Lagos by evening." Diana agreed reluctantly. The company helicopter was practically new, maintained by the best technicians, and piloted by Captain James, one of Nigeria's most experienced aviators. She had made the trip dozens of times without incident. She called Oliver to inform him about the sudden change in plans. "Be careful, darling," he said, though he wasn't particularly worried. "And call me when you're heading back." "I will. And when I return tonight, we need to have a very important conversation. I have wonderful news to share with you." What neither of them knew was that Daisy had been monitoring Diana's schedule through her network of paid informants. When she learned about the unexpected Abuja trip, she made a phone call from her bedroom with the door securely locked. "It has to happen today," she said quietly into her encrypted phone. "She's taking the helicopter this afternoon around 2 p.m. Make sure she doesn't return alive. Make sure she disappears from my life forever. I cannot allow her to continue taking everything that should belong to me." The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "Consider it handled. There will be no traces leading back to you." Diana boarded the helicopter at exactly 2 p.m., carrying only a briefcase with the necessary legal documents. Captain James performed his routine pre-flight safety checks, and all systems appeared to be functioning perfectly. "We should have you back home by 6 p.m., ma'am," he said confidently, as they lifted off from the company's private helipad. The flight to Abuja proceeded smoothly and without incident. Diana used the travel time to review the contract documents and prepare her strategy for the meeting. The legal complications were resolved more efficiently than expected, and by 4 p.m., they were ready to return to Lagos. "We'll be home ahead of schedule," Captain James announced cheerfully as they departed from Abuja. "Your husband will be pleased to see you early." Diana smiled, placing a protective hand over her still flat stomach. She couldn't wait to share the pregnancy news with Oliver and begin planning their future as parents. They were approximately halfway back to Lagos when the helicopter began shuddering violently. "What's happening?" Diana asked, looking up from her documents with concern. Captain James's face was tense with concentration as he struggled with the controls. "Something's seriously wrong with the engine systems, ma'am. This shouldn't be happening." The helicopter lurched dangerously to one side, and Diana gripped her seat as she saw the dense forest below rushing up toward them at an alarming speed. "Mayday! Mayday!" Captain James spoke rapidly into his radio. "This is Adebola Helicopter Lima November 749. We are experiencing complete engine failure and going down. GPS coordinates." He rattled off their position while fighting desperately to maintain some control, but it was too late. The helicopter spun completely out of control and crashed into the thick forest canopy with a thunderous impact that could be heard for miles around. Back in Lagos, Oliver was reviewing investment portfolios in his office when he received a frantic call from the company's flight operations manager. "Sir, we've lost all contact with the helicopter. The last transmission was a mayday call reporting engine failure, and then complete silence." Oliver felt his blood turn to ice water. "What exactly do you mean by complete silence?" "We're organizing search and rescue teams immediately, sir. We have their last known GPS coordinates." Within hours, a massive search operation was underway. Military helicopters, police units, local volunteers, and professional rescue teams combed the dense forest where Diana's helicopter had crashed. Richard, Catherine, and Daisy rushed to the search command center, their faces etched with worry and fear. "We're going to find her," Richard kept repeating, as much to convince himself as to comfort others. "She's strong and intelligent. She'll survive this." Daisy played her role to perfection, crying at appropriate moments and comforting her devastated parents when they broke down. But deep inside, she felt a twisted sense of satisfaction mixed with anticipation. Her carefully crafted plan was finally working. The search teams located the wreckage 2 days later. The helicopter had crashed into a cluster of massive trees, and the impact had been absolutely devastating. They recovered the bodies of Captain James and Diana's personal assistant, Patricia, but Diana herself was nowhere to be found. "She must have been thrown clear of the aircraft during the crash sequence," the search coordinator explained to the anxious family. "We're expanding our search radius significantly, but..." He didn't need to complete the sentence. After 3 days in the wilderness, with no food, water, or medical attention, and possibly severely injured, the chances of survival were virtually non-existent. Oliver was completely inconsolable. He stood at the crash site calling Diana's name until his voice was hoarse and raw, absolutely refusing to accept that she was gone forever. "She's alive somewhere," he kept insisting to anyone who would listen. "I can feel it in my heart. We have to continue searching." But after a full week of intensive searching with helicopters, trained dogs, and hundreds of volunteers yielding no trace of Diana, the authorities officially declared her dead. The memorial service was held without a body, and the cathedral was packed with mourners who remembered Diana as an intelligent, kind, and hard-working woman taken far too soon. Oliver spoke at the service, his voice breaking with grief as he shared precious memories. "Diana was the strongest person I ever knew. She faced every challenge with courage and grace. She made everyone around her better just by being herself. If there's any comfort to be found in this tragedy, it's knowing that she lived her life with purpose and touched countless hearts along the way." As the empty coffin, containing only some of Diana's personal belongings, was lowered into the ground, Daisy shed perfectly convincing tears and comforted her devastated parents. Inside, however, she felt triumphant. Diana was gone forever, and now everything could return to the way it should be. But Diana wasn't dead. When the helicopter crashed, she had indeed been thrown clear of the wreckage, but instead of dying on impact, she had landed in the branches of an enormous tree that broke her fall. She was severely injured, her left arm and both legs were fractured, and she had sustained a serious head injury that left her unconscious for several days. She was discovered by Mama Grace, a poor widow and subsistence farmer who lived on the remote outskirts of the forest. Mama Grace had been checking her small palm oil plantation when she heard faint groaning sounds from above and looked up to see a woman wedged unconscious in the thick branches. "Jesus Christ of Nazareth!" Mama Grace exclaimed, dropping her basket of palm fruits. Despite being 62 years old and quite small in stature, she managed to help the injured woman down from the tree and carry her to her modest mud brick house. For 4 days, Diana drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently about meetings and contracts. Mama Grace cleaned her wounds with warm water and medicinal herbs, set her broken bones as best she could with her limited knowledge, and fed her soup made from local vegetables and healing plants. When Diana finally opened her eyes fully on the 5th day, Mama Grace was sitting beside her with a bowl of peppery fish soup. "My daughter, you have awakened! Thank the Almighty God!" Diana stared at the unfamiliar thatched ceiling above her, then at the kind-faced elderly woman beside her. Her head felt like it was splitting apart, and she couldn't form coherent thoughts. Where am I?" she whispered weakly. "You are in my humble home, my child. I found you badly injured in the forest 4 days ago. What is your name? Where do you come from?" Diana tried desperately to remember. but her mind was completely blank. She couldn't recall her name, her family, her job, her husband, or how she had ended up broken and alone in a tree. The harder she tried to remember, the more severe her headaches became. I don't know, she whispered, tears forming in her confused eyes. I can't remember anything at all. Mama Grace's heart ached for the confused young woman. Don't worry yourself, my dear child. Sometimes when people suffer head injuries, their memories take time to return. For now, you need to rest and allow your body to heal. But the memories didn't return. Days turned into weeks, and Diana, who couldn't even remember her own name, remained with Mama Grace in the tiny village. The older woman decided to call her Aide, meaning first daughter, and Diana accepted the name because she had no other identity. As her broken bones slowly healed, Diana began helping Mama Grace with daily survival tasks. She learned to fetch water from the distant village well, pound cassava in the large wooden mortar, tend to the small vegetable garden behind the house, and help with other women's farming during harvest season. She was a remarkably quick learner and seemed to possess an innate intelligence that impressed everyone in the small community. This young woman is not ordinary, observed Papa Samuel, the village elder, as he watched Diana efficiently organize the weekly market day. She has the mind of someone educated, even though she cannot remember her past life. 2 months after the crash, Diana began noticing changes in her body. Her breasts were tender and swollen. She felt nauseated every morning, and her simple village clothes were getting tighter around her expanding waist. Mama Grace, she said one evening as they sat outside the house watching the spectacular sunset, I believe I might be pregnant. Mama Grace studied her carefully. She had suspected the same thing for weeks, but hadn't wanted to add to Ada's existing confusion and distress. We will journey to the clinic in town tomorrow, she said gently. Don't worry, my daughter. Whatever circumstances we discover, I will take care of you. The next day, they took a crowded, rickety bus to the nearest town, where a small government clinic confirmed Diana's pregnancy. The young doctor estimated she was approximately 4 months along. Do you remember the father of this child? The doctor asked, sympathetically. Diana shook her head sadly. Along with everything else from her previous existence, she couldn't remember being in love, being married, or being intimate with any man. Meanwhile, back in Lagos, Oliver was drowning in an ocean of grief and guilt. 1 week after the memorial service, Dr. Williams called him with news that made his emotional pain even more unbearable. Mr. Thompson, I have Mrs. Thompson's medical test results from her final visit. I thought you should know she was pregnant, approximately 6 weeks along when the accident occurred. Oliver collapsed into his office chair, completely overwhelmed by the devastating realization that he had lost not just his beloved wife, but their unborn child as well. He wept like a broken man. The months following Diana's supposed death were incredibly difficult for the entire family. Richard threw himself obsessively into work to avoid confronting his grief, while Catherine became reclusive, spending most of her time in Diana's former bedroom surrounded by photographs and memories. Daisy, meanwhile, began implementing the second phase of her calculated plan. She started visiting Oliver regularly, bringing home-cooked meals and offering what she presented as sisterly comfort and support. You shouldn't be alone during such a difficult time, she would say, letting herself into his house with a spare key she had somehow managed to obtain. Diana would want someone to look after you properly. She cooked his favorite dishes, organized his household, gradually rearranged furniture to her preferences, and slowly but systematically began inserting herself into every aspect of his daily life. Oliver was too depressed and emotionally numb to notice or object to these intrusions. You're being incredibly kind, Daisy, he would say absently, barely paying attention to her efforts. Richard and Catherine, grateful that someone was caring for their grieving son-in-law, actively encouraged Daisy's constant presence in Oliver's life. It's wonderful that you're helping Oliver through this terrible time, Richard told her approvingly. Diana would be proud of how you're caring for her husband. If only they knew Daisy's true motivations. As Diana's pregnancy progressed in the remote village, she adapted to her new reality with remarkable resilience and grace. She learned to speak the local dialect fluently, participated enthusiastically in community activities, and became beloved for her kindness, wisdom, and tireless work ethic. The villagers, who had initially been curious about the mysterious woman with no memory, gradually embraced her as one of their own family. Children flocked to her because she told the most fascinating stories, even though she couldn't remember where she had learned them. Ada has been blessed with special gifts, Mama Grace would tell her neighbors proudly. God sent her to our village for a divine purpose. When Diana went into labor 8 months later, the entire village was emotionally invested in the outcome. She was taken to a small, under-equipped hospital in the nearest city, accompanied by Mama Grace and several other village women who had become her extended family. The labor was long, difficult, and exhausting. Diana was completely drained by the time the doctor finally announced that she had given birth to quadruplets, 4 healthy, beautiful babies. Quadruplets, Dr. Okafor exclaimed with genuine excitement. This is extraordinarily rare and fortunate. You have been greatly blessed, my dear. But Diana was too exhausted and confused to fully process what was happening around her. She held 2 tiny babies that were placed in her arms and assumed they were twins, as the medical staff had quietly removed the other 2 infants from the room. What Diana didn't know was that this particular hospital operated an illegal baby trafficking network. Dr. Okafor, who ran the facility, was involved in selling newborns to wealthy families who couldn't conceive children naturally. When he realized that Diana had given birth to quadruplets, but seemed confused, had no family asking questions, and appeared to be a simple village woman with no resources, he made a quick, cold-hearted decision. He would tell her she had delivered twins and sell the other 2 babies to clients who had been waiting for healthy infants. You have been blessed with 2 beautiful, healthy children, he told Diana as she held the babies with tears of joy streaming down her face. A boy and a girl! They're both strong and perfect. Diana looked down at the tiny faces and felt an overwhelming surge of maternal love, despite not remembering how these precious lives had come to exist. She named them Timothy and Tina, simple names that felt right in her heart. The other 2 babies, also a boy and girl, were taken to a private room where they would be prepared for their new parents. But fate had different plans than Dr. Okafor had anticipated. The wealthy couple, who had paid handsomely for the babies, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, were successful Lego socialites who had been desperately trying to have children for over 15 years. When they first saw the babies, they were overcome with joy and gratitude. They're absolutely perfect, Mrs. Johnson whispered through tears of happiness. Our prayers have finally been answered by God. They took the babies to their luxurious Ikoyi mansion and hired the most expensive nannies and pediatricians money could buy. But within just a few weeks, both babies became seriously and mysteriously ill. They cried inconsolably day and night, refused to eat properly, and seemed to be failing despite having access to the finest medical care available. This is very puzzling, their pediatrician, Dr. Adelike, explained to the increasingly worried couple. All their medical tests come back completely normal, but they're obviously in severe distress. It's as if they're grieving for something we can't identify. The babies were taken to specialist after specialist, but no one could diagnose a physical cause for their deteriorating condition. Finally, Dr. Adelike suggested something that sounded impossible to the desperate parents. I've read about similar cases in international medical journals, he said carefully. Sometimes twins or multiple births who are separated from their siblings can experience what we call attachment syndrome. They instinctively sense that part of their family unit is missing, and their health deteriorates as a psychological response. But that sounds ridiculous, Mr. Johnson protested desperately. They're just babies. How could they possibly know about other siblings? The bond between multiples is incredibly strong, even from the moment of birth. If there are other siblings they were separated from, the babies can experience trauma that manifests as physical illness. The couple exchanged worried glances. They had been told the babies were twins from a poor rural family whose mother couldn't provide for them. But what if there had been additional babies in the birth? As months passed, and the baby's condition worsened dramatically, despite every expensive treatment available, the Johnsons faced an impossible emotional and financial situation. The constant medical bills, sleepless nights, and stress of caring for sick children who couldn't be helped was destroying their marriage and their savings. Maybe this is God's way of telling us we're not meant to be parents. Mrs. Johnson said tearfully one evening as she watched the babies cry inconsolably despite the trained nanny's best efforts. When the babies were 6 months old and showing no signs of improvement whatsoever, the couple made a heartbreaking decision. They couldn't bear to watch the innocent children suffer any longer, and they couldn't handle the emotional and financial devastation anymore. One dark night, they packed the babies' belongings, drove to Lagos University Teaching Hospital, one of the most prestigious medical facilities in the country, and placed the babies in carriers by the main entrance with a note that read, "Please take care of them. We tried everything possible but couldn't help them recover. They need to find their real family." Then they drove away into the night, leaving the babies to be discovered by the security guard making his rounds. The story of the abandoned babies dominated newspaper headlines the next morning. "Wealthy couple abandons sick infants at hospital," the papers declared sensationally. The hospital was flooded with phone calls from people wanting to adopt the children, but the babies remained in the hospital's pediatric ward as their mysterious condition continued to baffle the medical staff. Oliver happened to be visiting the hospital 3 days later to see his business manager's wife, who had just given birth to her first child. As he walked through the hospital corridor carrying congratulatory flowers, he overheard nurses discussing the unusual case. "Such a heartbreaking situation," one nurse was saying to another. "They're absolutely beautiful babies, but they just won't stop crying or eating properly. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong with them, but they're clearly suffering from something we can't identify." Something about the story touched Oliver's grieving heart in a way he couldn't explain. Since losing Diana, he had thrown himself completely into work to avoid dealing with his overwhelming grief. But lately, he had been feeling an inexplicable emptiness that business success couldn't fill or heal. That evening, he found himself unable to stop thinking about the abandoned babies. The next day, he returned to the hospital and asked to see them. Dr. Hassan, the pediatrician in charge of their care, was surprised by his request. "Mr. Thompson, I understand you've experienced a terrible personal loss recently, but caring for sick infants is an enormous responsibility that shouldn't be decided during a period of grief. I understand your concerns," Oliver said quietly, looking through the observation window at the 2 small forms lying in their hospital cribs. "But something about their situation is calling to my heart. Maybe they need someone who understands what it feels like to be lost and alone." When Oliver first held the babies, something extraordinary and unexplainable happened. For the first time since they had arrived at the hospital, they stopped crying completely. They looked up at him with alert, curious eyes, and he felt an instant connection that defied logic or explanation. "This is highly unusual, Doctor," Hassan murmured, watching the interaction with amazement. "They haven't been calm like this since they arrived here." Oliver spent the entire day at the hospital, and the baby seemed to improve dramatically just from his presence. By evening, he had made a life-changing decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "I want to adopt them," he told Dr. Hassan firmly. "Whatever legal processes are required, whatever it costs, I want to give these children a loving home." The adoption process took several months of paperwork, interviews, and legal procedures, but Oliver visited the babies every single day. Under his devoted care and attention, they gradually began to thrive and grow stronger. He hired the finest nannies, bought the best baby equipment available, and showered them with all the love he had intended to give his own children with Diana. He named them Peter and Priscilla, Peter meaning rock because he hoped to be their steady foundation, and Priscilla meaning ancient because he felt they had old souls that had somehow found their way to him in his darkest hour. Richard and Catherine were initially skeptical about Oliver's impulsive decision to adopt babies so soon after losing Diana, but when they witnessed how much joy and purpose the children brought back into his life, they embraced their new grandchildren with open hearts. "These precious babies have brought light back into his eyes," Catherine observed to Richard one evening as they watched Oliver playing peekaboo with Peter and Priscilla in their living room. "Perhaps this is God's way of healing his broken heart and giving him a reason to live again." Daisy, however, was not at all pleased with this unexpected development. She had been working steadily and patiently to position herself as Oliver's primary emotional support system, fully expecting that eventually he would turn to her for comfort and perhaps even marriage. The sudden arrival of 2 demanding babies had completely disrupted her carefully laid plans, but being the cunning and adaptable woman she was, Daisy quickly modified her strategy. She began visiting Oliver daily, not just to provide emotional support, but to help with the practical aspects of caring for infants. "You cannot possibly handle this enormous responsibility alone," she told him one morning, arriving at his house with expensive baby formula and designer diapers. "These children need a woman's nurturing touch, and I'm happy to provide it." Oliver, completely overwhelmed by the challenges of sudden parenthood, while still grieving his wife, was genuinely grateful for any assistance he could receive. "Thank you so much, Daisy. I honestly don't know how I would manage this without your help and support." Daisy smiled sweetly at his gratitude, but inside she was calculating her next moves carefully. If she couldn't remove the babies from Oliver's life, she would make herself absolutely indispensable in caring for them. Eventually, Oliver would recognize her as the perfect wife and mother figure for his new family. What none of them could possibly know was that hundreds of miles away in a remote village, Diana was raising the other half of these same quadruplets, completely unaware of her true identity or the fact that her husband and sister were caring for her other children. The twins Diana was raising, Timothy and Tina, were developing into truly remarkable children. Despite their humble village surroundings, they displayed an intelligence and curiosity that amazed everyone in the community. "Mama, why do birds sing different songs?" 4-year-old Tina would ask with genuine scientific interest. "Mama, how do plants know which way to grow toward the sun?" Timothy would wonder aloud. Diana, who still couldn't remember her previous life, but seemed to have an endless reservoir of knowledge, would patiently explain everything in terms the children could understand. She taught them to read using old newspapers and donated books that Mama Grace had collected over the years, and they absorbed information like eager sponges. By the time they were 5 years old, Timothy and Tina could read more fluently than many teenagers in the village. They were also exceptionally well-behaved, respectful to elders, and always eager to help with household chores. "Ada, these children are truly special gifts," Mama Grace would say with pride. "They have wise souls and young bodies." Diana had completely adapted to village life and thrived in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. She sold fresh fruits and vegetables in the bustling local market, helped other women with their farming during planting and harvest seasons, and had earned a reputation for honest dealing and fair prices. She saved every naira she earned, determined to provide her children with educational opportunities beyond what the village could offer. "Mama Grace," she said one evening as they sat under the large mango tree in their compound, watching Timothy and Tina teach younger children how to count using stones and sticks. "I want to move us to the city. These children are far too intelligent to waste their potential in the village. They deserve proper schooling and exposure to bigger opportunities." Mama Grace had been anticipating this conversation for months. She had watched Ada save every penny for 3 years, living on almost nothing so her children could have better chances in life. "My daughter, I understand your heart completely, but city life is expensive and challenging, and you don't remember anything about your past. How will you manage to survive and support the children?" Diana looked at Timothy and Tina, who were now helping other village children with their homework by lamplight. "The same way I've managed here, through hard work, determination, and faith in God. I'll buy fresh produce from village markets and sell it in the city. There's always demand for quality goods at fair prices." It took 2 more years of disciplined saving and careful planning, but eventually Diana had accumulated enough money to rent a small but decent 2-bedroom apartment in Surulere, one of Lagos's middle-class neighborhoods. The day they prepared to leave the village, there wasn't a dry eye in the entire community. "You will always have a home here with us," Papa Samuel told her as the entire village gathered to see them off. "Don't forget your village family when you become successful in the big city." Diana hugged Mama Grace tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for saving my life when I had nothing, for giving me a family and a purpose when I was completely lost. Please come with us to Lagos. I can't do this without you." "My daughter, I was hoping you would ask," Mama Grace said with a smile. "These are my grandchildren too. Of course I will come with you." This is not the end. If you have enjoyed watching this story up to this point, please give this video a thumbs up and type part 2 in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe if you still haven't done so by now. See you in the next one.